Hi everybody, my name is Noela Kennedy. I'm a singer and flute player from Dundalk in County Louth, and I'm delighted to be with you all to celebrate Jan Carson's new novel, The Raptures, a fantastic read, and really enjoyed it myself. And I thought I'd pick a traditional song that echoed one of the themes of the book. So I settled on this version of William O that is inspired by the singing of the late Nora Cleary from County Clare. So here is William O. As Mary lay sleeping, her love came creeping to her bedroom door so slow, saying, "Rise up, Mary, my lovely Mary, I'm your charming Willie, oh, with me right da, follow it la, with me right follow it Larry, oh." So Mary rose, put on her clothes, and to her bedroom door did go. And there she found her own true lover, face as white as a lily. So with me right da, followed it la, with me right followed it Larry, oh. Oh, William dear, where are your blushes that you had some years ago? Mary dear, the clay has changed them, I'm but the ghost of your Willie, oh. With me right da, followed it la, with me right followed it Larry, oh. They spent that night in conversation concerning their courtship years ago. They kissed, shook hands, and sorrowful parted, just as the Dalkey began to crow. With me right da, followed it la, with me right followed it Larry, oh. And as they were in deep conversation, down her cheeks the tears did flow. Farewell, darling, I must leave you, I'm but the ghost of your Willie, oh. With me right da, followed it la, with me right followed it Larry, oh. Oh, William dear, when will we meet again? When the fishes they do fly, and the seas they all run dry, and the rocks they will melt with the sun.
Hello everyone, welcome to the February edition of The Word. That was Nuala Kennedy performing her first song there. My name's Michelle Brennan, and I just want to officially welcome you to the February edition of The Word, which is an Ireland Reads special. And this month we were asking everyone to pledge to read for Ireland Reads Day on Friday, February the 25th. And you can go to the Ireland Reads website to find recommendations of books to read. For this special edition, we have Jan Carson joining us, and she will be in conversation with Una Mannion. We also have Nuala Kennedy, Nuala Kennedy that you just heard there on playing music, and she'll be providing music for the evening. We have our ever popular open mic, which will be coming up at the end. We have Peter Slavinsky and Maggie Daly performing for that. We also, after the conversation with Una and Jan, we will have our open Q&A. You can use the chat option to provide comments or questions, and I'll read them out during that time. We're hoping this might be our final online Zoom event, because in March we hope to be going back to our real life venue in in Sligo Central Library. So so I just want to officially welcome you to the Zoom event. So I'm going to hand you over now to Una, and she's going to introduce you officially to Jan. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. It's an honour to welcome Jan Carson to the Word and to Sligo virtually to talk with her about her work and her latest novel, The Raptures. I hope I can get that into the view of the camera, which was published last month by Doubleday. It's Jan's third novel and her seventh book. She has two short story collections already published and two collections of microfiction or flash fiction called Postcard Stories 1 and Postcard Stories 2. And I was reading just about how those got started in 2015 when Jan was having difficulty getting started writing or experience a writing block. She began to write a story every day on the back of a postcard and post it to a friend. And by the end of 2016, she was still doing them, and she took the highlights and created a book. And more recently, then in lockdown, when she was trying to, I suppose, connect and engage with people in her community, many of whom were isolated, she started the project again, and that became Postcard Stories 2. So in 2019, Jan published her second novel, The Firestarters, which won the EU Prize for Literature and was shortlisted for the Dalkey Novel of the Year award. Firestarters blends magic realism with sectarian violence, blurring worlds and distinctions. It's a narrative strategy that she returns to with The Raptures, with other worlds and hauntings. The Raptures is a propulsive, gripping novel that you will find hard to put down. It's tragic comedy, and it deftly layers those impulses, both tragic and comic. And I think it has that impulse, that push towards reintegration and community at the end, that tragedy doesn't have always. It's tender, witty, devastating, and funny all at once. 11-year-old Hannah Adger is one of the most memorable narrators I've read. Her huge heart, her intelligence in questioning suggests that possibly still in her generation, eventually things are going to be better. The Raptures has received universal critical acclaim, and I'd like to read another Northern Irish writer's commentary. This is Lucy Caldwell talking about The Raptures. A blistering account of small-town Ulster life. The Raptures is unflinching in its exploration of the corrosive effects of fear and small-mindedness on a community, and the trauma wreaked by uncompromising religious fundamentalism on a young and tender soul. Rich in a glorious colloquial idiom, rich with Jan Carson's sharp sardonic wit, it is ultimately a hopeful read, too, about the ways, whether we like it or not, we are all connected. Last night, Jan launched live The Raptures in her own community in Belfast. And we feel so lucky to have you here with us tonight, so soon after your publication. So congratulations and welcome.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's really, really lovely to be here with you all tonight. I'm just jealous that I'm not in Sligo because I really love that bit of the world, but it's still wonderful to be together online as well.
And Jan, I was hoping that we might start, if you would introduce us to the Raptures and maybe read, I know you're going to read some short excerpts through our conversation. So if you might introduce us to the book and the excerpt you're about to read.
Yeah, so I thought I would begin with this little passage because it really gives you an introduction to the world of Ballylack, and The Raptures is set in a fictional village called Ballylack. It's just outside Ballymena, which if anyone knows their accents, you can hear from my accent, that is the part of the world that I hail from. It's rural, it's insular, it's very Protestant, quite working class, and we joined the narrative in 1993 in the summer, and there has been a kind of epidemic of children falling ill in the local primary school. So unfortunately, Ross, who's the character at the start of this passage, has just passed away. So I'm going to read you just 2 pages of this to get a wee flavour of the novel. Ross had only just turned 11. He was still a child, though the thought of girls was already pressing. He'd sometimes go through the K's catalogue for pictures of women in bras and pants. He'd yet to touch a girl himself, had yet to taste coffee or travel anywhere in an airplane. He'd been looking forward to Lanzarote. It would have been his first time in a foreign place. Poor Ross. It's never easy going first. There's been no talk of the boys passing yet. It'll be mid-morning before the news spreads. In the houses and farms of Ballylack, people are getting on with their everyday doing. They're feeding the cows and drinking tea, watching the telly and heading to bed. There's no expectation that tomorrow will be much different from today. 93 has been an unremarkable year, and the summer's shaping up to be equally forgettable. It's neither hot nor particularly damp. It isn't a World Cup year or one for the Olympics. Majors in Downing Street, Clinton's in the White House. Folks aren't sure what to make of him. Keep an eye on that one. He's got notions, they like to say. There's talk of Clinton wading into the troubles. Word is, he thinks he can sort it out. Let the same fella have a run at it. Better than him have tried and failed. Down south, Ireland win the Eurovision for the umpteenth time in a row. In Your Eyes is the song in question. You'd have a hard time dancing to it, though it's got quite a catchy hook. Makes a change from the usual earnest shite, plonk, 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 and words about peace. What are the young ones listening to? Shaggy, Ace of Base, Too Unlimited, feel-good Euro hits. Well, they don't sound half so feel-good pumping through the tinny speakers at the GAA clubs and community centres where Ulster's youth hang out. Dancing, smoking, drinking cheap vodka decanted into Fanta bottles. No limits, we'll reach for the sky, the youngsters sing. Fists pumping furiously to the beat, black bomber jackets soaking up their sweat. They go buck mad every time No Limits comes on. It's only a tune to them, not the call to arms it could be. No limits indeed. What a load of bollocks. These kids hail from Aucher, Clocher and Cullibaggy. Say it out loud. Cullibaggy. You can practically hear the fences. They couldn't be more limited if they tried. Elsewhere in the province, they're still at it, killing each other with bombs and guns. It's the 23rd or 4th summer of this nonsense. Depends on when you start it keeping count. Most folks are fed up with the whole thing. They're adamant the killing must stop. There's a war in Bosnia and Afghanistan. There's a brutal one winding up in Rwanda. You can't turn on your telly for seeing dead bodies piled everywhere, blood pooling in the gutters, women howling and getting on. The people here are sick of death. This isn't a third world country. This is Britain. Or this is Ireland. Or both. Or neither. Or its own institution, peculiar as a maiden aunt. Either way, it's a civilised country. It's been a whole 2 years since McDonald's arrived. It should never have got to the state it's in. Same old, 20-odd years of everyday killings, routine set in years ago. Everybody's just trying to get on with enjoying the summer. Those who can have booked their holidays over the 12th. Best to get out before things kick off. The ones with money are heading to the continent just to be sure of a bit of heat. Everybody else is making the most of the weather. If it isn't raining, it's considered gorgeous out and not to be wasted. Now's the time to get the good of a garden if you're lucky enough to have access to one. The buzz of lawnmowers harmonises above the hedges, barbecue sizzle with sausage fat, children kick footballs down by the swings, the insect hum of combine harvesters zithers and twitches on the breeze. This is the sound of an Ulster summer. This and the distant rumble of lamb-leg drums. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jan. It's so evocative of place and time. And I was thinking about fictional towns, fictional names, and you chose to call this town Ballylack, and to set it in 1993. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about those choices.
Well, 1993 is very much my time. I would have been 13 then, and I think Hannah's 11, the little girl who the story centres around, and that sort of transition between childhood and teenage adulthood is such a really evocative, rich period, I think. You're so aware of, the world around you, trying to make sense of it, moving away from maybe what you've inherited from your parents, whether that be a religion or politics or a philosophy of what the world means, to having some kind of autonomy as an adult. So I think that makes you hypersensitive to the world around you. And 93 in Northern Ireland, the peace talks began, I think, in 1994. So there was a real sense of gearing up towards people just being sick of it all and wanting it to end. So I have that very much in the background of the story. The name Ballylack came from, flipping at every town in Northern Ireland, there's Bally something or other. So that was quite obvious. And I think the lack it speaks to a lack of something. And the small village that I grew up in, there was a definite sense of, it was quite a negative space to grow up in, so lack seemed appropriate. But then obviously I spent a lot of time Googling to make sure that there wasn't a townland called Ballylack somewhere in Ireland, because I didn't want to be, get run out by the locals or something. So as far as I know, there is no Ballylack in Ireland. Now somebody's going to write in and tell me that they grew up there.
And I think there's a Ballinalack, isn't there, on the road to Dublin, maybe from Sligo. But can I ask you about, picking up on what you were just talking about the particular time and pre-ceasefire and pre-peace talks. The beginning of the book begins with I suppose, a promise, as you refer to it in the acknowledgements, a promise from the journalist Lear McKee that things will get better. And it ends the book, without, that's not a spoiler, it sort of tonally hits that note again. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and because it seemed very conscious that there was a kind of tribute here about a generation.
I think a couple of things, like Lyra was very much in my mind. I was in the midst of writing this whenever she was murdered, so she was very there in the background, and her beautiful, really powerful essays about the ceasefire babies and the future of Northern Ireland, and what these young people who grew up post Good Friday, what they can maybe bring to Northern Ireland and the future of Northern Ireland. So that was there. But I also wanted to explore, and I think she did touch on this in her work as well, the incredible pressure that we are putting on young people. In a sense, those young people have inherited a complex set of circumstances that they didn't create the mess that is Northern Ireland. It was the generation before who did that, and yet we continually talk about them in terms of reference, like they are the future of Northern Ireland. They're going to lead the charge for integrated education and reconciliation and hope, and it's a lot of pressure to put on young people. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but there is a kind of sense in the novel. There's a group of young people who are kind of purported to be the future of Northern Ireland, and they get to have a go at recreating that, to start with a blank canvas, and hopefully recreate a utopia. And they don't recreate a utopia. Within a number of weeks, they have returned to kind of the old prejudices and divisions that they've seen modeled to them by their parents. So I'm constantly thinking about that. Like, it's a lot to expect of young people that they will create something incredibly positive when all that's been modeled to them is sectarianism and division. And I've even thought about it a lot in terms of climate activism recently. Our young people are inheriting a complete mess that they didn't create. It was the generations before who completely messed up our climate. But now we're looking to them and pointing to them and going, oh, you guys are the future, you're so full of hope and you're active and you're involved. It's an incredible amount of pressure to put on young people. So I've been thinking a lot about those things, and they were in the ether definitely when I was writing this novel.
It's really interesting, and the comparison with the ecological catastrophe, because I think there's so many elements in your book beyond the troubles. I was wondering maybe if, because Hannah is the narrator, if you might read again from the book and just give us a sense of Hannah and her voice.
Yeah, and I'll give you a wee kind of spoiler before I read this. I don't think I've ever written a character who's more like myself. I was so lazy writing Hannah. I just really channeled myself at kind of the age of 11. So if you think she's a bit precocious, it's because I was probably an extremely precocious 11-year-old. I'm going to read right from the first chapter. It's in Hannah's voice. It's first person. And she's just at school and she's had a visit from a lady who is trying to get all of the kids in her class to write an essay about the future of Northern Ireland. I can tell from watching the news that most folks are fed up with the Troubles. The people who get interviewed are always crying or looking angry and also crying because more people have got themselves killed. People have had enough of it. No more bombs, they say. No more shootings. No more army boys in the street. We want something better for our weans. Them lot need to wise up and start talking to each other. I'm not sure who stopped talking to who. Ian Paisley's never done talking, and Jerry Adams talks so much they've got somebody else in to do his voice. I suspect it's the ones in the balaclavas who need to talk, maybe to each other or to the police. I don't know why we have the Troubles here, but I know it's us children who deserve something better. We're the future of Northern Ireland. We had a special assembly about it last month. A woman came down from Londonderry. Principal Taylor arranged for her to speak to the older ones. There'd have been no point in her talking to the juniors about serious stuff like the Troubles and peace. Until P4, you only do playing and colouring in. The women arrived in the afternoon. This meant we got out of Mass, so everybody was in great form. The lady had a fellow with her from the paper. He made us line up in the playground for a photo. Boys at the back, girls at the front. Leaf with the girls because he's wild tiny for a boy. We held a big banner in front of our legs so you could only see us from the middle up. It was yellow with the words, "The Future of Northern Ireland," written on the front in shiny black letters. Just before he clicked the camera, the man made a face and stuck his tongue out. We're all cracking up in the photograph. Principal Taylor pinned it on the notice board. We don't usually have women take an assembly. It's nearly always ministers, and ministers are always men. They come in to do a wee Bible lesson and say a prayer. Best ones bring puppets or flannel graph. Sometimes we sing a couple of choruses, but only if it's one of Mrs. Getty's days with P5. She's the only teacher who knows how to play the piano, and the singing sounds woeful without it. Like cats in a tumble dryer, Kathleen says. The ministers are never from our church, because our church isn't in Ballylack. It's in the town 5 miles away. Pastor Bill wouldn't mind driving out. It's just that there's half a dozen other churches in the village and they get first dibs in visiting our school. Dad says it's okay to listen to other ministers. They're Protestants like us, just a different kind. We're the evangelical charismatic sort, which means we believed in getting saved and going to hell, Jesus and also the Holy Spirit. In our church, the women wear hats. We use the Bible with the old-fashioned words, but sing modern choruses off the overhead projector. We speak in tongues and do special praying with hands on. We don't believe in the cinema or chewing gum. Now, the chewing gum thing might just be my parents, because I've seen ones from the youth fellowship blowing bubblegum bubbles round the back of the minor hall. We're not the popular kind of Protestant. There aren't that many of us. In Ballylack, there's only us and Granny and Mrs. Nugent. In the town, it's a bit better. There's enough to fill a medium-sized church. At Christmas and Easter, it's pretty bummed. Granda Pete's not our sort of Protestant. I'm not sure what kind he actually is. Granda says prods are like potatoes. There's 5 dozen different varieties, and they're all much of a muchness when you peel them back. Well, the woman who came to our school was called Sinead, which means she was probably a Roman Catholic. You can tell from their names and how they keep their gardens. Catholics are more through other than us. After the assembly, I heard her talking to Miss McEwen. "Jesus," she said, "I could murder a coffee." Well, I knew she definitely wasn't a Protestant then. Protestants don't take the Lord's name in vain. Sinead had come to tell us we were the future of Northern Ireland, and we needed to work together for peace. And I will leave it there.
So, thank you so much. I love those expressions, and earlier Lucy Caldwell, I read her blurb about the kind of glorious colloquial idiom, and some of those moments like "through other," which I'd never heard before, and apparently Catholics are a bit more through other, and Thran.
I'm sorry if that's really offensive.
Wonderful. It actually is so reassuring. It explains so much to me about myself. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that inflection of that of idiom all the way through, and it lifts the prose so much, and we get a sense of otherness, but a place at the same time.
I think a couple of things in it. One thing was like you can hear when I read that I go full on Ballymena. So mostly in real life I'm talking in my polite voice. When I read this is what I really sound like. And it's really refreshing to be able to like let your real voice out on the printed page and to realize that it gives your experience and who you are validity. And growing up, we read lots of books in school about set in Ireland or by Irish writers, and none of them sounded like me, and none of them had the experiences that I'd had growing up in a kind of Protestant market town in the countryside. And I wanted to bring that to the page, that kids would see their own story reflected. And it is just a joy to be getting messages from people going, cleared, I haven't heard that word in ages, I used to use it all the time. That's lovely. I think there's also a bigger point there, and I've said this a number of times recently. I think Anna Burns did us a tremendous favour in Milkman because it's unapologetically Northern Irish in its language. There was a real sense for a while there that people outside of the North wouldn't get us if we talked the way we actually talk, that we'd have to contextualise things, that we'd have to put in a little footnote, like the Good Friday Agreement footnote, this was a peace treaty signed in 1998, or we couldn't use our vernacular and colloquialisms. And that's nonsense, because some of the novelists I love the best, I'm a magical realist, I read a lot of Latin American and South American literature, which is peppered with Spanish words and Portuguese words and references to food and culture. And you learn in context, you learn those things. Or, you go to this thing called Google and you look it up and you find out something. So I actually think Anna, in saying, I'm not going to explain Milkman, I'm just going to let the character talk in her own voice, as people do in our down. And I think it's done all right for her, really, to be honest. It's been pretty successful. And it's perhaps opened the door for the rest of us to feel freer to use our own language. Does that make sense?
Completely. And when you were just, something occurred to me there when you were just talking about Hannah's, reading Hannah's voice. And it reminded me, if I forget, to ask you about women's voices. But just before that, I wanted to ask you about having a child narrator, and does that give you a kind of freedom, like the way Hannah sees things, and sort of there's a directness, or she says what it is. And I was wondering if you could talk about that choice and the limits, or the openness of that voice.
Yeah, I think a child narrator is one of the sneakiest things that a novelist or writer can do, because you can use it. It's a trope you can use to ask a lot of things that would sound clunky or kind of forced in the mouth of an adult character, particularly around kind of background information. So when Hannah makes that comment there about who needs to talk. It can't be Ian Paisley because he's talking all the time, and it can't be Jerry Adams because he's been silenced. That would sound very direct to put that just as a statement, but it becomes playful and creative when Hannah says it. And Hannah gets to ask things like her parents are very conservative Christians, and she has a degenerate aunt who they pray for, but Hannah asks, why do we always pray for Auntie Rachel but we don't invite her to our house? Now, that would sound very pointed if an adult said it, but with Hannah, you can begin to unpick the hypocrisy of the parents there. And I guess I've thought about this quite a lot recently in the context of, Kenneth Branagh's movie Belfast. Is it's his interpretation seen through the eyes of, I think Buddy's 10 in it. And I think he missed a trick, because I think he could have used the Buddy character to question a lot more. Because there is that history of Roddy Doyle as used child narrators, the Butcher Boy, there's a lot of work there. Mickey Bo and Me. There's fantastic use of children to unpick really complex class and political situations. And I think Brianna could have gone a wee bit further with Buddy there. But I love writing child narrators just because it's a lazy way to do to to get a point across without it feeling really didactic and thrown at your readers' faces kind of thing.
It also, like some, well, I don't want to give it a spoiler, but like one of the children says, "I'm dead, so I am," and I just started to laugh, and it's not a particularly, there's this humor and joy kind of that comes out of their voices. Um, and you kind of, I feel like you completely let that fly in the book. So much of the energy and it zings off the page, it really does, and it comes from those kids, those children characters, just saying what they speaking straight.
Mm-hmm. I think the humor thing is it's really interesting as well. Like it was super hard writing the back blurb for this. Because the back blurb of a book is what makes people pick it up in a bookstore, and we were like, essentially it's a book we're putting out in the middle of a pandemic about an epidemic where 11 children die, and the rest of it is an exploration of Protestant evangelical culture. That does not sound like a laugh a minute. And yet it is actually quite funny, and people have been sort of shocked by that. I had a message from somebody the other day that said, "I don't know if I'm a bad person. I'm just reading one of the death scenes, but I've been laughing out loud at it." And I wanted to play with that because I think there's a real Irish sensibility of mixing all of life together, that you cannot separate out the sad stuff from the funny stuff. I have a theory it's because we are hosts. Irish people are always trying to put the other person at ease. If you're in an elevator with an Irish person, they will not stand there silently. They will make comments. You're always trying to make sure the other person is okay. And so even in the midst of the darkest situation, they're trying to use humor to kind of take away the gravitas and make the other person feel more comfortable. I have been in rooms with bodies where people have said funny things to try and lift the moment. And that seems desperately inappropriate, but I think it's about trying to connect on a human level. And so I don't think I'm actually capable of writing a book that's thoroughly dark, because as an Irish person, I've never had a moment where I'm entirely dark. There's also some other wee thing going on in the background at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny. For me, reading it, I felt like that those moments, the pathos gets heightened by the humor in a way, and because it is a book where you would actually cry, but you're also laughing, and those two energies kind of heighten each other. I think if it's all dirge or it's all laughter, it's not as effective as the juxtaposition. I wanted to ask you about Hannah's voice. At the very beginning of the book, she tells the reader that girls, they're taught that girls are made up with the leftover bits from boys, and later when she's in church and she wonders what women's praying voices sound like, because she can only hear men's praying voices, because she'll never hear a woman's praying voice. And there's a whole I suppose strain throughout the novel about women and women's place, and women beginning to challenge those domestic spaces and their silencing, and in fact, I think the characters change, the women change over the course of the novel. I was wondering if you could talk to us about that.
It's very much that was my experience of growing up in that world, that there was no space for women. I grew up in a very conservative Presbyterian church where women were not allowed in the pulpit. They weren't allowed to teach or lead in any role. So I wanted to write that, and I think I always questioned why that experience wasn't reflected more in the literature I saw around me. And the answer to that is because you cannot write that from within that community. As soon as you begin to question or raise your voice, you get moved to the peripheries of the community and then you're out. They're not communities that deal well with dissension, and particularly women trying to, move towards autonomy. So I read a lot of literature in writing these women, which explored kind of women's emancipation within really conservative religious communities. So things like Naomi Alderman's Disobedience, which is a Hasidic Jewish community, Miriam Toa's Women Talking, which is about Mennonite women questioning how the men have treated them. Those are really important books to me because they're really subtle and they show that it wouldn't be believable for my characters to make these huge statements and stands against kind of the men who have the constraints that the men have put on them. That is not believable within that community. So you're trying to take your female characters on a slow, subtle journey, moving them forward incrementally. And Hannah's mum, I think, in the Raptures is where you see that strongest. By the end of the book, she hasn't left her husband. She hasn't left the religious community. She's still, to all intents and purposes, in this kind of, under a heavy patriarchal weight. But she has grown and developed, and she has questioned things, and she's planted thoughts in her daughter that might lead her somewhere different. And I think that was believable. There's no way I could have written this book to still be within that community. It's not that somebody would have stopped me, it just would have been too hard. It's hard enough to write it on the peripheries. My family are still part of this community. And so it's hard enough to question from the edges, but to question from within, I think you'd have to be awfully brave to do that.
It's amazing, Jan. Like such a gift to give us, and I'm so glad you wrote it. And I'm wondering if you might talk about the book has a cast of outsiders. It's not just people from Ballylack, but there's a whole host of other characters who aren't integrated. And I was wondering, I know you have an excerpt from one of the narratives, and I was wondering if you might read that and we could talk about those other voices.
Yeah, I've just put it into a wee bit of context. I'm going to read you a section from Alan Gardner, and the background to this is my brother Alan asked to be a character in one of my novels, and that's a very dangerous thing to ask because I made him into a horrible character. So Alan Gardner was what came out of that. As Una said, there's a lot of characters on the periphery of Ballylack who don't. They feel like outsiders. There's a Chinese family who run the Chinese takeaway in the village. There's Alan, who you're about to meet, who's married to a Filipino lady and has 2 mixed-race children who's really struggling to accept. And there's also some characters who, because of their class background and or other aspects of their life, they feel like they're outsiders. And I think one of the things that I wanted to do in the book was to show how almost all the characters feel like they don't fit in. And it's only towards the end when some of them begin to talk about this lack of acceptance and how they feel that like they're outliers, that they all start to realize actually we all feel like that. And that was something very much as a woman and also as an artistic woman growing up in that community. I always felt like the weirdo. I was the kid that wore the bright red DMs to church and tried to, dye my hair funny colours and was always on the edge. And it's only now, later on, I'm talking to other people who, for different reasons, I've met so many people since this book who grew up gay within evangelical Protestant circles and, very understandably felt like outsiders there because they were actively unaccepted and didn't feel they could even say sometimes who they were. So yeah, I wanted to speak to people who felt like outsiders. Now this section is where Alan meets Maganda, his wife, for the first time. I haven't read this one before, so it's be fun. Alan got his wife from the old folks' home. She'd been his mother's carer. There were a few foreign girls working in the home, mostly Filipinos and one Indian. Some of them already spoke with a sing-song and drawl, though they'd never be considered local. Locals wouldn't lower themselves to do the things they'd do for minimum wage. Alan had been on the lookout for a wife. He'd an ad running in the newsletter. Wanted, a wife to help about the house and farm. No children, no existing medical conditions, time wasters need not apply. With hindsight, he'd have been better placing it in the Lonely Hearts section, but this was significantly dearer. He paid £2.50 and was somewhat dismayed to find his future wife listed between a tow bar and a holiday flat in Pishendall. Nobody responded. Maybe a photo might have helped. Of the farm, rather than Alan. Alan Gardner wasn't a good-looking man. After 2 weeks, he'd cancelled the ad. There was no point throwing good money after bad. Alan wasn't experienced with women. He was almost 40, yet had never felt the need for one. But with his father dead and his mother doting, he was struggling to keep the farm afloat. The house had descended into a pigsty, and he was starting to fade away. Tinned soup, toast and yoghurt weren't enough to keep a working man going. Anything more complex required cooking, and cooking had been his mother's domain. Maganda traipsed into Alan's life just in time. Any later, he'd have been nothing but skin and bones. He'd walked into his mother's room one wet afternoon to find Maganda shoveling pureed vegetables into the old woman's mouth. 5 foot nothing in sinless white gutties, she'd smiled up at him from a stool sat between his mother's knees, plastic spoon arrested mid-flight. Pleased to be meeting you, Mr. Allen. Alan knew straight away that this one would do rightly. A foreign girl would be much less hassle than trying to court a local lass. It wasn't looks which drew him to Maganda, though she was pretty enough and not as dark as some of the others. He also found her breasts appealing. They were very large for such a short woman, and pressed tightly against her uniform as if trying to effect an escape. During the 3 short days of their courtship, Alan frequently thought about Maganda's breasts. He imagined himself unzipping the front of her work uniform so the pair of them came popping out like helium balloons suddenly released. He also entertained a very specific fantasy wherein she cooked him a fry wearing nothing but a pair of frilly black knickers. Alan's erotic yearnings never progressed beyond this. I wouldn't have known how to imagine a woman fully nude with a frying pan. Alan did not appreciate the finer points of Maganda's charm. Her soft smile, like a birthday candle blooming weekly in the dreary corridors of the nursing home. The way she sang, barely audible songs in her mother tongue as she went about toileting the old folk. Her beautiful eyes, her beautiful, beautiful dark brown eyes. It was the heft of her thighs and arms which appealed. Maganda might have been little, but she was substantial and built for hard work. Alan needed a woman who wouldn't mind breaking a sweat. He understood the difference between a farmer's wife and an ordinary woman. Farmers' wives were cut from sterner cloth.
Hopefully your brother forgave you when you dedicated the book to him. Because Alan isn't the most appealing character. It was one of the most interesting things to me about this book is structurally what you did, because we think we're with Hannah in a first-person narrative, and then we start getting these other voices told kind of third-person close, but sometimes the narrator is omniscient and kind of giving us a much more telescoped out picture. And I have sort of 2 questions. One is the choice that you did in doing that. Why you chose to do that. And also, I've read that you wrote a short story for every character in the book, and I'm really curious about that as well. So it's kind of 2 questions about these other voices.
I'll start with that. I was actually sitting here. I started for the launch last night. I printed out one of the backstories. So this is Bayani's backstory here about his Bayani is Alan's son. And this is about the day that his dad forces him to join the Young Farmers Club, and it really doesn't go very well. So I wrote a short story about each of the children in the novel before I even started working on the manuscript, and I set them a year before, so long before the kind of illness starts to sweep through Ballylack, because I really just needed to get a sense of them as people rather than like just tropes kind of to advance the plot. So, so if all you're doing is having a child there so you can kill them off, it can very easily become reduced down to kind of little stereotypes and cliches. So spending like significant time with each of them and kind of falling in love with some of them. There were actually 3 kids who didn't make the cut, and didn't make it from the short stories to the novel, and I still feel really terrible about that. But it definitely, I would thoroughly recommend it. Even if you're not going to write a short story, spending significant time with your characters, even if they're quite minor. It just made writing the novel much, much easier to go there. In terms of the structure and of kind of how it's put together, I will give massive credit to, I had 3 different editors who worked on this at different times, and a lot of it was what they pulled out. So, the front of the book, the start was actually the end. So the whole novel flipped backwards in edit. There were, each of the chapters at the beginning there was a first person narration from each of the children that opened each of the chapters. Those all went. So there was a lot of significant work done in edit to get that structure. And I think the more, I've published 3 novels, I've probably written 10 to get the 3. So I now know how I write, and it's very much a splurge, overwrite, and then go back and work hard in the edit to try and get that structure right. And it's instinctive for me. So I have no background and no official academic background in creative writing. So I'm not thinking, is this omniscient? Is this third person close? I'm thinking what feels natural for the situation. How would this character want to tell this story? I'm just going with my guts, really. And then hoping that my editor will point out anywhere where it's terribly, terribly flawed.
It's amazing to me that with all the children, 11 children, how well I know each of them. I think, and you do end up with your favorites. So like I love Caroline for her gentleness, but I also love Kathleen for her
Oh, Caroline's
anger.
backstory is just gorgeous. Like, Caroline's backstory is about her dad. There's an old caravan in the farmyard, and the summer before, her dad tells her that if she cleans it up and does it up, she can have it as her own house to live in, because she's sharing a bedroom with her little sister, and she spends her whole summer getting this caravan fixed up, and then her dad just sells it. And if you've read the novel, like, her dad is a bit of a git in the novel, and that's where that aspect of him came from. Like, as I was writing the short story, I was like, oh, this is why Caroline's so meek, and so, because the father character is always trying to teach her a lesson. He's not, he's just not sensitive at all to her. But that wouldn't have come in the novel if I hadn't spent time writing that short story to get to know them. But that short story is heartbreaking. I think I will have to do something with it somewhere.
Can I know we have just a few minutes left, and you're involved in so many projects, and there's 2 things. I wanted to ask you about Bad Bridget, which I listened to some of the podcast, but maybe you would describe what Bad Bridget is and what your role is in the forthcoming exhibition.
Yeah, so Bad Bridget was an AHRC funded project across Queen's and the University of Ulster, researching women who migrated from Ireland to America in the 100 years kind of from the famine onwards, who then ended up incarcerated. So they ended up imprisoned for prostitution and as pickpockets, and there was actually one serial killer, which was quite intriguing, worryingly from County Antrim, so I don't know if we breed them up here or not. But they did a lot of research into these women and kind of the reasons often why they end up in destitute and incarcerated. Like, there was a lot of abuse and a lot of circumstances that were beyond their control. So there's a podcast, a fantastic podcast, which is names. Who's the lady that narrates it? The nun from
The
Siobhan
nun from
McSweeney.
Derry Girls.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's awful to register that. Siobhan McSweeney narrates it, and it's a brilliant podcast. But we've just been now commissioned to turn that work into an exhibition, which will open in the Ulster American Folk Park in Omagh on the Easter Friday, Good Friday. So if you want a wee day trip down, you can come and see it. And I have written all the copy from it. So I created a voice of Bad Bridget, who narrates the kind of whole story of these women. And I got to write beautiful monologues from 6 of the ladies' individual stories, and I got the real historical sources and diaries to work with, which was brilliant. We've got a scent consultant, so we've created bespoke scents that you can smell as you move, onto the coffin ships and through the tenements in New York and Five Points, and so it's been fascinating, really, really interesting learning curve for me. I've never done that kind of writing before, but I really did fall in love with some of the women, so I might do something else off the back of it at some stage.
The project sounds really amazing. And maybe just to finish, during lockdown, I know you were working with community groups and trying to connect with people. And I don't know if you have to hand one of the postcard stories that you read, that you wrote for a particular person, or just during that process. And it would be lovely to hear if you do have one.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to read this one. So, a lot of these ones were collected over different periods, and then we sent them out, and this is the Ben, the proper illustrator, did this one. Proper illustrator is a terrible term. A lot of children did illustrations for me during lockdown, and they were gorgeous. So we gave the stories to the kids, and then they did their own drawings, and we posted them mostly to elderly people who were in nursing homes or isolated. So they got a wee piece of art and a story. This collection, I'll just be really honest, these are all stories from before lockdown. So the postcards that were written during lockdown haven't been published yet. But this did come out during lockdown, so it's a bit confusing, and we did some events around this, but I'm going to read one of them just to give you a sense. This one, none of them have titles. Cut my hair like Jesus, he says. He has a picture on his mobile just in case the hairdresser doesn't know what Jesus looks like. She takes the phone out of his hand and holds it close to her face, pretending to concentrate. She knows exactly what Jesus looks like. She's seen him enough times on statues and stained glass windows. When she was younger, she had an illustrated Bible with coloured pictures. Fat baby Jesus in the donkey straw, miracle Jesus with white blue robes, dying Jesus pinned to the cross, and the glowing white version from after the resurrection. She liked this one best. It was almost a ghost. Mistaking the hairdresser's silence for confusion, the man catches her eye in the mirror. Sort of long, with a beard, he explains. Not too long, though. I don't want to look like a woman. She stares at the back of the man's head. He's beginning to bald. For Jesus, you'd need at least a bit of something to work with. You need more hair if you want to look like Jesus, she says. Oh, well, says the man. What about John Bon Jovi, then?
Jan, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have a Q&A with the audience now, and I'm going to turn you back over to Michelle. Jan, thank you so much for
Thank you. That was really good fun.
With us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks for that. That was fantastic. It was brilliant, and I think you may have gathered from her voice and how the interview this evening. This book is brilliant, and I completely recommend it. And you can feel the humour and the dark humour and the sadness and everything, and the characterization and everything. It's a fantastic book, and I definitely recommend it as well. We've had a few comments now online. So Maeve McCormick says, I love the range of different perspectives and common issues, e.g. wanting a sun holiday in the narrator's voice. This is from when you spoke at the beginning, at the first reading you gave. Jerry Boland comments that was brilliant, and I'll be buying the book tomorrow, so I just recommended that we have a copy on the Sligo Library shelves. Tony Kiernan commented that Ballinalack is in Westmeath, Una, just in case you were wondering. You mentioned that. For your second reading, Hazel OG commented that it was a great reading and so engaging. Mary Foley commented that it's brilliant. Enda has commented, love the sprinkling of idiosyncrasy. I knew I'd go mess up in this word. I love the sprinkling of idiosyncrasies to add depth to the Protestant and Catholic character descriptions. Catholic gardens and Protestants don't chew gum. Maybe it was just in her house. So just a little comment on the reading there. Jerry Adams talked so much they got somebody else to talk to him. Oh, this is from Tommy Kieran. Jerry Adams talked so much they got somebody else to talk for him. I'm paraphrasing, but I love the humorous dig at Section 33 and Adams. Yeah. Margot Gorman to everyone says, thanks to Jan and to Una for questions. Great session. And from Keith Hopper, lovely readings and great conversation. Thank you both. And that's kind of it. That's how far we've got. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Michelle.
We've more as well. This is from Peggy. Thank you so much for wonderful readings. The language and characters are also rich. I love the rich local dialect. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Michelle.
So that's it. Yeah. And thanks, Jan, for joining us this evening, and Una for your brilliant questions. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to our open mic now, and we had 2 at the beginning, but we now have 3 readers for the open mic. So first of all, we're going to go to Peter Slavinsky, please. Thank you.
Hello everyone, how are you? Today I'll read a poem I wrote not too long ago. It's called Luna. Her brown eyes, the shade of a big chestnut found among the yellow autumn leaves. Her constantly dilated pupils, the size of marbles. Her wired hair that she would leave on every jumper. Her beige patches, like the color of the perfect coffee with milk in the morning you are off. Her white body, like the snow in the Coca-Cola Christmas advert. Her often dry nose, which looked like an analog stick. Her thin, upright ears, like 2 radars that were always operational. Her undocked tail that she would wrap around her back paw when sleeping. Her metacarpal pads smelling like warm popcorn. Her claws that would occasionally get caught on my side pocket. Her pink tongue that would gently wet my hand to represent great affection. Her 2 missing teeth to document mistakes from the past. Her heart beating as fast as the engine cylinders of a moving car. Her lonely howls like a wolf without its pack. Her loud sudden barks like a bell before a doorbell. Her quiet growling to signify not now. Her reaction when I'm back, like a gambler who hit a jackpot. Her joy when we played together. Oh, and my love that felt so obvious. My stroking that brought serenity. My scratching of which there was never enough. My presence that meant peace. My patience, which certainly was abused. My pride after a fresh trim. My reaction when I got back, like a gambler who hit a jackpot. My joy when we played together. Oh, and how I want another look, how I want another walk, how I want to give another treat, how I want to give another scratch, how I want to hear another bark, how I want to feel another lick. How much I would give for all of that. And I am sorry for that pink liquid, but it was for the best. And I stayed until the end, and even longer. And not a single goodbye felt sufficient. And I am not okay at all, but I am getting better. But I will never be all right. All the 44 tears, 1 for every line. I hope that is enough. Goodbye.
Wow, Peter, that was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Stunning. Our second open mic is from Maggie Daly, please. Can you unmute yourself, Maggie?
I haven't anything to present.
Okay, that's fine. We move on to Niall Simon, please.
Hi everyone. This is a poem I wrote recently, and it is called "The Nightlight." She fits in against me perfectly, as if carved out especially. On my extended arm, her head rests, and I wonder how the hell she can sleep like that. Her hair is in my face, but I don't mind because it smells nice. A more specific answer I cannot give, only to say that it smells like her. Maybe it's a shampoo or a conditioner. I should find out. She gives my forearm a peck, a thing she's begun to do in her sleep, like her heart is sending instructions to her clocked off brain. It is a cold February, and the duvet is light, and I am 6'1" to her 5'6", so my feet stick out, but still, together, we are warm. The room is in complete darkness, but I still feel I can see her red hair, or maybe I can't at all, but my mind is coloring it in. I don't like to sleep in total darkness, but here it is okay, because thankfully, I have my red nightlight.
That's fantastic, Niall. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the word for this month. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Jan Carson and Una Mannion for joining us for this evening. And we'll have a final song coming up now from Noela Kennedy. And we are finished for the evening. Oh, I just want to say again, so this is our last Zoom event, and for March we'll be going live in Sligo Central Library. And this is all in collaboration with IT Sligo BA in Creative Writing and Literature. And join us all on Friday online for our Ireland Reads campaign. So pledge to read at irelandreads.com. So you can do that on Friday the 25th. And that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks for all the open mics as well for joining us too. Thanks. Bye.
Hi everybody. Well, I've brought you with me here today to a very special place nearby, a little glen that I think is inhabited by the wee folk, the Dini Bioga. And I'm going to play for you a hornpipe, a traditional hornpipe that is called the Lone Bush. And the lone bushes, of course, you'll see them all over Ireland. They're the tree that's not been cut down, the odd tree, like the raggedy tree in a field or a glen that's been left untouched because it's said to be a place where the Dini Bioga gather and get together. So here we go with the Lone Bush, inspired by the raggedy tree. The Lone Bush.